and welcome to another issue of KP Knitcraft Explains It All. We're going to go over a couple of different things today. Some of it's techniques, some of it's ways to make knitting easier on yourself, and we're going to do a little bit of a safety protocol. I want to go over my favorite cast on, and I'm going to do it on this swatch because I need a provisional cast on. Now, the cast on that I use, I call it the around the needle cast on. You need a crochet hook for it. And then obviously you need your knitting needles as well. Now, this particular pattern has you cast on a smaller needle than you're even doing your ribbing on, so it calls for 3 needle sizes. And that completely makes sense. It's a tubular cast on, which has way more stretch in it than most cast ons do. And like I said, I'm not going to show you how to do the tubular cast on. If you want to learn how to do a 2x2 tubular cast on, go look up Very Pink Knits, because she's got a great video on it and it's wonderful. And it's really not as convoluted as she says it is in the beginning. She's like, oh, it's got way more steps. No, there are some 2x2 tubular cast ons that have like 18 steps to them, and you're almost cabling in the middle of them. And trust me, they're convoluted and they don't need to be. So go check her out. All right, I love her videos. She's who I reference all of my students to if I don't have a video on it already. And I don't do a lot of technique videos, and I don't plan on it. But this one I will do, because we're going to talk about the common mistakes that people make with provisional cast-ons. All right. There are 2 things to remember when you're choosing a yarn. Well, really just one. One thing to remember when you're choosing a yarn for a provisional cast-on. All right, I'm having a Monty Python moment. It is 2 things. If you're knitting, your main yarn that you're knitting with is wool. Do not do a provisional cast on in wool. Wool likes itself. It's like Velcro, and it will stick, and you will hate trying to pull that provisional cast on out. It's not going to come away cleanly, so use something else. Now, if you're knitting in cotton and you've got a little ball of wool that you're going to use for a provisional cast on, that's perfectly fine. Do that, but never put wool with wool for a provisional cast on. You're not going to be happy with it. It's going to be very frustrating, and you could end up dropping stitches, and that is precisely what we don't want. Now, usually I will use crochet cotton, because normally I'm knitting in fingering weight and smaller, but for this particular project it calls for a worsted weight. So I'm getting my big girl needles out and I'm doing a worsted weight sweater. Pray for me. So what I'm going to actually use is acrylic. Now, I don't keep a lot of acrylic in my stash. I don't like working with it. I don't like the way it feels. Not even for baby stuff. I will go into that at another time, and you can have my little rant on wool for baby stuff. But that's not happening today. This yarn was purchased to repair something, and I kept it around because I can use it for this application. It's great for a provisional cast on. Now, it's 75% acrylic, 25% wool, so it does have a little bit of wool, but it's not enough to cause you issues, especially with my main yarn, since that's a superwash wool. It's not quite as grabby as a 100% non-superwash wool would be. And this is just Encore. You can generally find this at almost any yarn store. You're not going to find this at a craft store, because you're more likely to find, your Bernat or your Karen or your Red Heart. All of those work, and they're dirt cheap. So having a ball of this kicking around for nothing, no other purpose than this, is actually a wise investment. I mean, a ball of Red Heart is about $4, and they're about 800 yards. And you don't use very much for a provisional cast on. Now, when I first learned how to do a provisional cast on, the idea was you make a slip knot, you get your crochet hook in there, and then you start chaining. All right, and you make it as long as you need to. And then you pull the end through, you break your yarn, you pull the end through, and you pick up these little bumps on the back side of the chain. Don't do that, all right? You can do this all in one step and have it all on your needle at once, all right? So it pretty much starts the same. It starts with a slip knot, okay? And then you put your hook in, and you give it a little tug and tighten it down. Okay, not super tight. You want it to be able to move. It needs to be flexible. I tend to use a crochet hook that is of a similar size to the needle that I'm casting onto because it makes it just flexible. So this particular cast on, I use it as both a provisional cast on and as an actual cast on. It lays really flat and it looks really nice. But for me, the big thing is that it looks almost exactly like the standard bind off, so that the top and the bottom of your piece can actually look the same. Okay, so this requires, as I tell beginners, you need 10 fingers and 3 toes to knit. All right, this cast on requires every bit of agility that you have. All right, because what you're going to do, and if you're an English knitter, this is going to feel even more fiddly than it does as a continental knitter. But if you're left-handed, it's going to be easy. So you're going to take your knitting needle and you're going to place it on top of the working yarn. Now, if you are an English knitter, this is why this is going to be uncomfortable. You're going to bring it around and hold it this way and then maneuver that yarn through the slip knot. Now you can do it, all right? It's not impossible, but it's a little uncomfortable. Now, as a continental knitter, it's a little easier for me because all I'm doing is crossing the hook over my needle and grabbing that yarn. But in between stitches, you need to move that yarn back to the back. Now, as you can see, I have 3 stitches here and 1 on the hook. Why is the 1 on the hook important? I'll tell you when we get to the end. Now, my stitch pattern calls for, I think it's 32 stitches. They didn't number this chart, and I don't know why. 32 stitches, and I'm actually only going to cast on half of that, so I'm going to cast on 16 stitches. Okay, so I've got 2. There's 3, 4. Let's get right up close and get a slow-mo here. 5, yarn to the back. 6, yarn to the back. 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. Now, 15 on the needle, 1 on the hook. If I was using this as my main yarn and this was going to be my cast on, the final thing that I would want to do, I have my 16 stitches, put the yarn to the back, and then slide this final stitch up onto the needle. And there, you'd have a really pretty cast on. Your main yarn's already attached and you just start knitting. But I need this as a provisional cast on, so I'm going to take this guy back off and put it back on my crochet hook. And I am going to put 1 more stitch on the needle. And then I'm going to verify that I actually have what I think I have. Alright, so let's get that out of the way. So 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, 16. And I do. Now, the final step for this is a way that for you to know which way you're going to unravel this from. Now, I've seen other people where they tie a knot in this end to signify that that's where the slip knot is, and then they chain a few, and then they put a few on here. If you noticed, I didn't do that. I started with a slip knot right off the bat, and I didn't do anything extra on this end. So on this other end, which will be the end that I take off, I'm just going to chain a couple extra stitches. And that is going to tell me that this is the end that I need to undo to break my stitches free. So, break the yarn, and all you have to do is pull that out. And then you have this really lovely, provisional cast on. Now, why would you use this as a normal cast on? Well, first things first, if you're knitting ribbing And you don't want to use a provisional or a tubular cast on. You don't want to do anything special. Maybe you're a little uncomfortable with new cast ons and new techniques, and you just want to do what you know. This is a really nice and stretchy cast on, all right? But what I want you to do is kind of look at what's going on down here, all right? It leaves this really pretty, almost braided looking edge. And that is a lovely cast on edge. You don't have to do anything special to that at the end of your project. It doesn't even really require a lot of blocking. It doesn't need any extra attention during the finishing stage. And that's one of the reasons why I love this cast on, because it serves multiple purposes. It's very stretchy and it looks pretty. So from here, how do you work? Well, it's really, really simple. All right, you take your yarn and you start knitting. You just knit, you just knit, you just knit. Doesn't require any other prep work than that, okay? Now, for those of you who don't know me personally, okay, I knit in English, continental, and I get this wrong all the time, Portuguese. And I knit all of them in left-handed as well. So you may see me switch my styles up within a single video, and I'll try and explain why I'm doing that. In this case, I've always found it hard to join my yarn as a continental knitter, so I always join it as an English knitter. And I do something a little funky, but I'm not going to do it here because it's not necessary here, because this is going to come out. Okay, so just make a loop and knit it through. I usually do my first 2 stitches this way. You're fine, come on. And then I'll swap and do it that way. So it's funny, you can probably hear the person trying to be very, very quiet because I'm sitting at the kitchen counter. My father has come to visit from Canada, and he's not the type who sits still. So this morning, he has cleaned my gutters and has now fixed my lawnmower, and apparently needs a Band-Aid. Capped it above the coffee machine. All right, so there's the first row knitted, and I'm not going to keep going because, as I said, I'm not going to show you this technique. But what I want to show you is when it comes time to pick these stitches up, if you've used a halfway decent contrasting yarn, you can see these little loops right here. Those are the bottoms of your stitches. That's that underswing, which allows you to just pick them up here before you even unzip it.